And another thing we've been talking about most of the time is the three-part, which we translated to three parts, but I think it's supposed to be green transition or something like that. And we are very fortunate to have Ole, Anders Nors, Anders Nors? Hannes Horsten. And I've been trying desperately to find an official English translation of your title.
Yeah.
Policy advisor for nature policy advisor at DN, which is the natural, the NGO that protects biodiversity in Denmark. And they were at the table when the negotiations were being made about the three parts. So.
Thank you. And thank you much for the invitation. My name is Anders, and I am representing the Danish Society for Nature Conservation, which is by far the largest conservation NGO in Denmark. We have about 140,000 members today, and we took part in this, we call it Green Deal, because green tripartite is too difficult to say. So we call it the Green Deal for Denmark, and we took part in the negotiation last spring. It was about 6 months, and it was the government initiated the negotiation. We took part, the farm and food industry took part, and Danish industry, and also the municipalities and some big unions. And a compromise was sealed in June this year. And in November this year, the parliament adopted the agreement, more or less word by word, and also the financing of the agreement. So I will take you briefly through some of the targets of the Green Deal, and then focusing on the actions that might have biodiversity consequences. We hope they have. But to us, this is a very interesting and very ambitious deal. It's by far the biggest deal for land use change of our time in Denmark. To us, it's very important that we are looking for solutions, as we also heard previously, combining some of the problems we have about water quality, nature, biodiversity, and climate. And this deal tries to look at all these problems and finding some actions that can solve more problems at one time. And the big chunk in this Green Deal is that we have to reduce the area of farmland in Denmark with 15%. And this was actually agreed with the Farmer Association. So it means basically that we are looking into reducing the farming area with at least 400,000 hectares. And this is by far the biggest change in the landscape for many, many, many years in Denmark. We also have another interesting thing, and that's a very substantial funding. The government is pulling out 42.3 billion Danish kroner. And then this foundation from Novo Nordisk, they came out with another 10 billion. So we have approximately what compares to 7 billion euros to work with in this Green Deal transition. And the money should go to both land purchase, but also to subsidies, trying to make farmers grow trees instead of crops, or maybe just stop growing anything on their farmlands. And this is the big puzzle that we have now. So the next step, and this is where stakeholder involvement comes into place, is that we now are looking into local Green Deals. So this is going to be organized around these 23 catchment areas we have. And the action will actually be based mainly on targets improving water quality. And this is just one of the catchment areas in the northern part of Jutland. And the more red, the more damaged the water quality. And all the actions in the Green Deal are trying to reduce nutrient load into these areas, and by that also making space for nature. And we have a very interesting game going on now, because the municipalities, they are going to organize these local Green Deals, and local members of our organization and local farmers, they are going to sit around the same table with the municipalities. They are going to point out, where do we take actions? How do we solve water quality, climate problems, and also make space for nature in the area where we live, or where we farm, or where we are the administrative authorities. So this is being set up at the moment, and we don't even know until Monday the final organization, and they have to draw out this plan in 2025. So they are in a hurry, or we are in a hurry. So I will try to just briefly take you through some of the actions, trying to point to where we see some possibilities for creating more space for nature. And as Signe said, one of the targets is that we have a new biodiversity law in Denmark. In 2030, we have to have 20% protected areas. We also have to make an agreement about the definitions, which is going to be very interesting because we have this very two sort of concepts of what protected nature is. And of course, in Danish Nature, we are aligned with the Biodiversity Council. Glad to hear your definitions. And all this is going to be evaluated in 2027 to make sure that we have the progress needed. So we get there in time in 2030. And this is also going to look at subsidies, which is also a big problem. We heard that. We're trying to improve the subsidies for natural grazing in order to make sure that more of the money are spent the right way. And of course, we have some concerns about this. These definitions are going to be very interesting. Are they going to be the 2% protected areas, or do we also already have more or less 15% on land? And we also look into how are we going to proceed after 2030. In Danish Nature, we of course think we should adopt the 30% goal from the European biodiversity strategy, but that's not part of the compromise as it looks today. Then we have this Danish concept, nature national parks. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's quite interesting. Actually, it's state-owned nature reserves. Used to be plantation forestry or farmland or a mosaic of different land uses, but now they are taken out of farming, taken out of forestry. We are reintroducing large herbivores like horses and oxes and moose. And then we restore the natural hydrology, and then we secure public access. And then these nature national parks should actually just function as biodiversity reserves. We already had 15 agreed on, and now with the Green Deal, we have 22 because 7 new nature national parks were agreed upon. One of them just in the outskirts of Copenhagen, actually. It's going to be very interesting. And they are going to be as large as possible, preferably more than 1,000 hectares. Some of them are quite small, and that is one of our concerns, because as we heard from Signe, size do matters. We are also concerned about the role of the herbivores. Are they allowed to roam freely? Are they allowed to reproduce? As it is today, they are not allowed to reproduce, for example. We have very small herds in the nature national park, so the effect of these herbivores will be reduced greatly. But maybe it will come later. And then also, where are we going to have these nature national parks? Because as you know, it's very important that they are placed where we have current biodiversity or high biodiversity potential. And some of the state-owned forests that are left for this, they are actually quite poor plantation forests. So maybe we should look outside state-owned areas to find the rest of these nature national parks. Then we are going to re-wet or restore carbon-rich soils in order to reduce the climate problem. 140,000 hectares of carbon-rich lowland soils will be restored and re-wetted in 2030. And at least 70,000 will be protected nature. And we will also look very into this evaluation in 2027 to see whether farmers are actually taking up these subsidies that are being prepared for them at the moment. And again, we are a bit worried about how this restoration is taking place, because some of these carbon-rich soils projects we have been seeing today, they are not quite good for biodiversity. They are not managed in a way or restored in a way that make 100% potential biodiversity. And also this targeting is going to be very crucial to this task. And then we have a very interesting one. We are going to make unmanaged forest in places where we don't have forest today. So this is sort of a long-term action. We will try to create 100,000 hectares of new forest 20,000 hectares will be state-owned and 80,000 will be private landowners, and they will have to accept that these forests will never be managed. They can never take out timber for production or anything. And it should focus on nature and biodiversity and allowing for natural processes. And of course, again, as Sine said, will we have many small spots of unmanaged forest, different places, or can we make it into a few larger areas? And what about these natural processes? In Denmark, we have a very strong history of plantation forest, and we don't have much history of letting forest regenerate by itself. And of course, unmanaged forests should be regenerated by themselves. They should be regenerated in areas where natural hydrology has been restored and also natural grazing. But we are a bit concerned that many of these forests will be planted and then left for themselves. And that will not be the biodiversity potential as we see it. And then we have this one. I don't know if the wording is correct, but it's called permanent extensification in Danish. And it's actually just paying farmers for stopping farming. Simply as that. We had a subsidy scheme this year, which aimed at 10,000 hectares. And as we hear it right now, it's almost 100%. So it seems very interesting that the farmers are actually interested in getting paid to stop farming on some of their lands. And that will be a new program in the years to come. And they will focus on restoring biodiversity. And one of the things we are looking into is this overgrazing problem. We have a lot of overgrazing in the Danish natural areas, actually subsidized by some of the subsidies that Sine talked about. But we also have very strong competition with solar power. It should be for biodiversity, but I think we have to accept that some of these areas will actually be used for solar power. And what about the management again? Will they be managed to preserve and give place for biodiversity? And then we have a very interesting sort of side dish in the Green Deal, because very close to the end agreement, the Novo Foundation and the Danish government, they made an agreement for 10 billion Danish kroner. And one of the targets in this agreement is that the collaboration will aim at large signature projects where new, larger, contiguous nature areas with high quality are created, or targeted quality increase in existing nature areas. And to us, this is maybe the biggest opportunity of creating these large, coherent nature areas with high quality. And today we don't know much about what these signature projects will be like, but of course we are trying to convince the government and the foundation that they should listen to the Biodiversity Council when they decide where to put them and how to manage them. And then it's all about where we do these things, and we have these maps you have been seeing from Sine and the Biodiversity Council. We know where to put these nature areas. We know where to direct these actions if they are going to have to live up to the full biodiversity potential. But it's volunteer for farmers to enter these subsidies. It's volunteer for them to sell their land. So it's going to be very interesting to see how fast is this going to proceed, and are we going to get the right lands for biodiversity? And that is hard to tell yet. So the deal is made, and let's get going. And we will be focusing on biodiversity in all the actions in the Green Deal, but also very important, I think, to remember that a lot of things are not dealt with in the Green Deal, protecting existing forests, for example. We also have to remember that a lot of this biodiversity concerns about not what we do on farmland that we take out of farming, but also how we manage and protect existing nature. Thank you.